In this tutorial, I will show you how to create this procedural scratched plastic material in Blender. Now there are a few really cool things you can do with this scratched plastic. So in the tutorial, I'll show you how to set this up so that you can change this value node right here, and it's actually going to change the size of the scratches. And then also you can change the color of the plastic. So I think red looks pretty nice, but you could also change it to blue. So I'll show you how to set this up as well. And of course you could create any plastic color that you wanted. And as you can see, this plastic material also looks kind of worn out on the edges. So I'll be using the pointiness value on the geometry node to make the edges look like they're more worn out. Now, one thing to note here, the pointiness value doesn't actually work in Eevee. So if you want to do this tutorial in Eevee, you can, but you won't be able to use the pointiness value. So instead, what you could do is use the ambient occlusion node. That works in Eevee. It doesn't look exactly the same though, but if you really want to do this tutorial in Eevee, then you could switch this out for the ambient occlusion node, but I would recommend using Cycles Render for this tutorial. This procedural material is available for purchase on my Gumroad store, so if you'd like to check that out, I'll have the link in the description, and also you get access to the project files if you join my Patreon. And if you'd like to purchase more of my procedural materials, then you can also check out my Blender procedural material packs, or if you'd like to learn how to create more of my procedural materials, then you can also check out my procedural material tutorial playlist on YouTube. And then also, before we start, I wanted to thank this video's sponsor, Blender Grid. Blender Grid is an easy-to-use render farm specifically designed for Blender. I've used the service and I highly recommend it. Upload your Blender file or a zip file with the blend file and textures. You can change the render settings on the website before rendering. Blender Grid will let you know the cost before you start the render. You can even choose when you want the render to finish if you're on a tight deadline. While it renders, you can check the rendered frames to make sure everything is rendering properly. Once it finishes, just download the files and compile the frames in a video editor. Use the link in the description to get $20 of render credit on your first render. So let me just show you what I have set up in the 3D space if you want to set yours up like mine. So I added an icosphere, a subdivided icosphere, and I shaded it smooth, and then I also added a Suzanne monkey head and I gave it a subdivision surface modifier so it's nice and smooth, and then I shaded the object smooth as well. And then also, to get some nice bright lighting right over here, I added in this plane light. So this is just a plane with a subsurf modifier so that it is round, and then I gave it a bright emission material. And then to get some nice realistic lighting and reflections, I added in this Machine Shop 02 1K HDR, and this is from polyhaven.com. So I'll have a link in the description if you'd like to download that from polyhaven.com. And then I will also be using the Node Wrangler add-on in this tutorial. So to enable that add-on, you can just click on Edit and open up Blender's user preferences, and then over there on the add-ons, just search for the Node Wrangler add-on and you can just turn on the Node Wrangler add-on. Alright, so let's get started. So I'm going to select this object, I'm going to click on New, and I can just rename this to Scratched Plastic. And then I can click right here and I can drag and drop this material onto this object as well so they have the same material. Alright, so we're going to be creating 4 different types of scratches and then we'll combine them all together. So to start off, I'm going to press Shift A and I'm going to add a noise texture. So just search for the noise texture and drop it down here. And then using the feature from the Node Wrangler, you can hold down the Control and Shift key and then select nodes, and that is going to preview the node. So I'm going to turn the scale up to 15 so it's a bit smaller, and then with the noise texture selected, I'm going to press Control T, that's using the other feature from the Node Wrangler, and that's going to add the texture coordinate and mapping. Now I want to use the object coordinates, so we're going to put the object into the mapping. Now this isn't really looking like scratches right now, so on this scale here on the mapping, I can change this X scale, and that is going to stretch the noise texture, and it's going to make it look more like scratches. So on the X scale right here, I'm going to change this to 30. So now those look much more like scratches. Now, as I said at the beginning of the tutorial, I want to create a value, and then I can just change that value and it'll change the size of all the scratches. So I'm going to press Shift A and I'm going to search for a value node. Let's drop it here, and then I can take this value and I can put that into the scale. That way we can just change this single value and it'll change the scale for all of the scratches. So on the value node right here, I'm just going to set this to a value of 8. Alright, now those scratches are not very contrasty, they're kind of just gray, so I want to make this much more contrasty. So to do that, I'm going to press Shift A, and I'm going to search for a color ramp, and let's just drop the color ramp right in here. So I can now start to drag these out, and that's going to make it more contrasty. Now I actually want to switch these values, so I'm going to put the black over here and the white over here. So I'm just going to bring the black to about there, and then I'll bring the white over. And you can now see that we have all those little scratches in there. So that is it for our first layer of scratches. So I'm going to be creating 4 different layers of scratches, and then we'll combine them all together. So to organize this better, I'm going to press Shift A, and I'm going to go to the search here, and I'm going to search for a frame, and let's drop the frame in here. So I'm going to deselect everything, and then pressing B for the box select, I'm going to click and drag, and I'm just going to select these 3 nodes, and then I can just drag and I can drop them into this frame. Now the texture coordinate and value nodes are going to be plugged into the other scratches, so I'm not going to put them into this frame, I'll just leave them out here. I'm also going to click on this frame, and then I can press the N key, and that is going to open up this side panel right here. And if you go to node, you can go to this label here, and I can just rename this to Scratches 1. And you can see now that I've renamed that, this says Scratches 1 right here. So I can now press N to close that. Now Scratches 2 is going to be very, very similar to this. So what I'm going to do is press B for the box select. I'm just going to box select all of these nodes, and then I'll press Shift D to duplicate, and we're going to drop it right up here. So I now want to take this value node, and I'm going to put it into the scale because I want to change the scale for these nodes as well. I want this value node to control the scale for all the scratches. And then also I'm going to Control Shift and select this color ramp to preview it. And then also I want to take the object coordinates, and I want to put that into the vector of this mapping here. And then this scratches right here, it says Scratches 1. So let's press N to open up the side panel, and I can just rename this label to Scratches 2, and then I can press N to close that. Alright, so now this is looking exactly the same. If we Control Shift and select these nodes, you can see they're exactly the same. So these scratches, Scratches 1, they are going up and down, but I want Scratches 2 to be going side to side. So right here on the mapping node, I'm going to take the X scale, and I'm going to turn that back to 1, which is the default. And then I'm going to take the Z value, and I'm going to turn that to 30 instead. So now if I Control Shift select this, you can see that's going up and down, and Control Shift to select Scratches 2, and that is going side to side. So that's looking really good. So we now have 2 layers of scratches. So let's create a 3rd and a 4th layer of scratches. So to create the 3rd layer of scratches, I'm going to press Shift A, and let's search for a Voronoi texture, and I'm going to just drop it right up here. Let's also select this scratches, this frame right here, and I'll press Shift D to duplicate it, and I'm just going to drop it right up here. And then I can click on the Voronoi texture and drop it in there. And then again, I also want to take this value, and I want to put that into the scale so that we can control all of the scale of the scratches with just this value. And then I also want to take this object and put that into the vector so that we're using the object coordinates. And then I'm going to Control Shift and select the Voronoi to preview it. Now if I click right here on this frame right here, I want to press N to open up the side panel, and this one I want to rename to Scratches 3, and then I can press N to close that. Now on this Voronoi texture, I'm going to click on the F1, and I want to instead change that to distance to edge, and you can see we have that cool texture there. And so we're going to use these lines right here to create the scratches. Now these are way too thick right now, and they're not very contrasty, so I'm going to press Shift A, and I'm going to search for a color ramp, and we're going to drop the color ramp right in here, and then click and drag and drop it into this frame right here. So I can now take this white value, and I can drag it really, really close. So I'm just going to drag it very close, just like that, and then I'm going to click on the black tab, and I'm also going to drag it out just a little. And then I will drag the white tab even closer, so that is the result that we're getting. Now I don't want them to look like chunks that are kind of connected together, I want them to just look like scratches. So to create this, I'm going to click on this noise texture, and I'm going to press Control Shift D. That will duplicate the Voronoi texture but keep everything plugged up to it. And then on the distance to edge, I'm just going to change this back to F1. And then I'm going to take this color ramp, and I'll press Shift D to duplicate this as well and bring this down. So I want to take the distance, and I want to plug that into the factor, and then I can Control Shift and select the color ramp. So I'm going to drag this way back so that we can start to see this better, and you can see that it's creating all these circles here. So I want to make those circles way more contrasty, so I'm going to drag this to about there, and then I'll also drag the white tab out as well so those circles are much more contrasty. So now I can use these circles here to get rid of parts of these scratches so that there won't be as many of them and they won't be connecting. So to do that, I'll press Shift A, and I'm going to search for a math node. Let's drop the math node right here, and then click and drag and drop it inside the frame. So I'm going to plug this color ramp into the top value, value, and then I'm going to take this one and plug that into the bottom value. And then it's really important to make sure you clamp the values, and what clamping the value does is it restricts the colors to just 0 and 1. So if you clamp that, you can now see that there is dark right here, there's black, and then this is fully white. Whereas if you were to not clamp this, you can see there's different shades of white. So just clamp that, and then it will clamp the values from 0 to 1. And there we go. So you can now see that we're just having some little scratches here and there. And then if you want to play around with those scratches, you can change this right here. So you can pull this color ramp out if you want to make those scratches a bit bigger or a bit smaller. And you can also play around with this if you want to be able to see more of those scratches or less of those scratches. So that is the third layer of scratches. So I want to create one more very similar to this. So I'm going to deselect everything and then press B for the box select. I'm going to select all of these nodes right here. I'm now going to press Control Shift D. Control Shift D will duplicate everything, but it'll keep everything here plugged up. So we'll just bring this over. So I know this might be looking a bit complicated, but really it's pretty much the same thing. This value is just going into the scale value, and that way we can play around with this scale, and it's going to change the scale for all the textures. And then this texture coordinate is just telling all the textures to use the object coordinates. So we're using the object coordinates there from the texture coordinate. All right, so right up here, we're going to click on this frame and we're going to open up the side panel, and I'm going to rename this one to Scratches 4. And then I can Control Shift and select it to preview it. Now it's looking exactly the same right now, and that is because we haven't really changed anything. So Scratches 3 and 4 look the same. So I want to use a mapping node to change where it's mapped. So I'm going to press Shift A and I'm going to search for a mapping node, and let's drop the mapping node right up here. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this object right here, the object coordinates, and I'm going to put that way up here on the vector of the mapping. And then we can replace this. So I'm going to take the vector and put that into the vector of the Voronoi, and also this one as well. So put that vector into the vector of the Voronoi. And then you can also click and drag, and you can drop this mapping node inside this right here, inside the scratches frame. So now that we have that plugged up, we can just change the mapping values, and that's going to change where the scratches are. So right here on the Y rotation, I'm just going to change this to 90. That way it's just going to rotate the scratches over by 90 degrees. And now if you Control Shift and select this and this, you can see that they are now located in different spots. All right, so we now have all of these scratches. We have 4 layers of scratches. So scratches 1, 2, 3, and 4. So we can now combine them all together into one group of scratches. So to do that, I'll press Shift A, and I'm going to search for a Mix RGB, and let's just drop the Mix RGB right up here. So I'm now going to take this add, this top one here, I'm going to put the value into color 1, and then on the scratches 3, this value is going to go into color 2, and then I can Control Shift and select this to preview it. Now I just want to add the dark values. So on the mix here, I'm going to change this to darken, and then on the factor, you can just turn that all the way up to 1. And so what this is doing is it's adding both of these textures together, and so we now just have one group of scratches. So I'm going to do the same thing down here. So I'm going to take this Mix RGB and I'll press Shift D to duplicate it, and let's just drop it down here. So we're going to combine scratches 2 and 1 now. So let's take the color, we're going to put that into color 1, and then we're going to take the scratches 1, we're going to take the color ramp and put that into color 2, and then just make sure this is set to darken with the factor to 1. So again, we're taking these 2 different scratches and we're combining them together, and you can see now we have lots of scratches. So now we have these 2 and we just want to combine these 2 together. So to do that, we'll do the exact same thing. So I'm just going to select this and press Shift D to duplicate it, and then let's take the color and we're going to put that into color 1, and then this one here, we're going to put that into color 2, and then Control Shift and select this. And now you can see that all of those scratches have been combined, and we now have this really detailed map with lots of random scratches. So let's just select these nodes. We're going to just kind of bring them up here. And so I now want to put these scratches into the normal to give it some bump. So the scratches are going to look like they're going into the mesh. So I'll take the color here and I'm going to put that into the normal, and then I'll press Shift A, and I'm going to search for a bump node because we need to convert this to normal data. So just add the bump node right in here. So the color is going to go into the height, and then the normal can go into the normal. So I can now Control Shift and select the principled and just see how that's looking. And you can see we have all those nice scratches in there. Now I do think that looks a bit too strong, so I'm going to turn the bump strength to a 0.1, just to a 0.1, so it's much less strong. And you can't really see those too well now, but once we make the object darker and more shiny, you'll be able to see those scratches better. And if you want to make the scratches deeper, you can just turn the strength value up. All right, so now let's make the colors. So I'm going to press Shift A, and I'm going to search for the geometry node, and let's just drop the geometry node right here. And then I'm going to plug the pointiness value up to the base color. Now, as I talked about at the beginning of the tutorial, material, the pointiness value doesn't work in Blender EV. So if you want to do this in EV, you could press Shift A and you could search for the ambient occlusion node. Now, if I Control Shift and select this, you can see the ambient occlusion node sort of looks similar. So you could play around with the options here, and you could also add a color ramp in here to kind of play around with the colors. But I'm going to be using the geometry node because it works better. All right, now I want to be able to control those colors a lot better. So I'm going to press Shift A and I'm going to search for a color ramp, and let's just drop the color ramp right in here. So the color ramp is going to be in between the pointiness and the base color. So I can now start to drag these out, and we're going to make it more contrasty. Let's also Control Shift and select the color ramp to preview it. And you can see this is what the pointiness is doing. So what it's doing is it's making the outer parts of the mesh lighter, but then the crevices, it's making that darker. So I'm going to drag these pretty close, so something like that. And then I'm going to click on this one here, and I want to make this a red plastic. So I'm going to make this kind of a dark red, kind of like that. And if you'd like to use the same exact red color that I'm using, then you can click over on the hex value and you can type in a hex value of 812725. So that is the exact red color that I'll be using. And then this white tab here, that is going to be the color of the plastic that's kind of been rubbed away and kind of worn. So I'm going to change this to kind of a peachy tannish color. And the hex value for this one is a hex value of 8C6A57. All right, so I can now Control Shift and select this to preview that, and you can see now it's just looking like the edges are a little bit worn. Now I also want to make this more shiny because plastic is pretty shiny, so I'm going to take the pointiness value and put that into the roughness, and then we need to control that better. So I'm going to press Shift A and I'm going to search for a color ramp, and I'm going to put the color ramp right in here between the pointiness and the roughness. So we can now change these values, and that's going to change the roughness. So specifically what I want to do is I want to make the edges, the worn edges, look like they've been scuffed up a little bit, and so they're going to be less shiny, but then the rest of the plastic is going to be more shiny. So I can just Control Shift and select the color ramp to preview it, and I want to bring this black tab to about here, and then I'll bring the white tab over to about here. So I can Control Shift and select this, and you can now see that right over here that is going to be less rough, but then right down here that's going to be more shiny, and you're not really able to see that very well. So I'm going to take the black tab and I'm going to make that more gray, and now you can see that's becoming more and more rough. So I'm just going to turn this down so it's a bit more black, something like that. So you can see that is definitely more shiny, but then kind of there along the edges, that is more rough. And you could make that stronger if you wanted to by pushing these values together. So I'll just Control Shift and select the principle to preview that. All right, so that's looking pretty good. You can see it's shiny and we have a bunch of different scratches in there. So that is looking pretty cool. But there is just one more thing that I want to do to this material. I do want to add just a tiny little bit of noise all over the plastic. So I'm going to press Shift A and I'm going to search for a noise texture, and let's just drop the noise texture down here. And then I'm going to take this texture coordinate and I'm going to press Shift D to duplicate it and drop it here. You could also just take the object and plug that into the noise texture, but it's easier just to add another noise texture over here, and then you can plug the object into the vector. And then I can Control Shift and select it to preview it. So I'm going to turn the scale on this noise texture to 1 so that those colors are much bigger. And then I do want to have a little bit of detail, but not too much. So I'm going to turn the detail here to a value of 8. All right, so I can now plug this into the bump just to give it a little bit of bump. So I'm going to take the bump node right here and I'm going to press Shift D to duplicate it, and let's drop it right down here. So the normal can go through the normal. So we can now take the factor of the noise texture and we can put that into the height. And that way we can combine multiple maps together to make more bump. So I can now Control Shift and select this bump and you can see what it's doing. And that is a bit strong. So on the strength here, I'm going to change this to a 0.04, and that way it is much less strong. So I can now Control Shift and select the principled BSDF and kind of zoom in here, and you can see now there's just a tiny little bit of noise, and that just makes the plastic look a bit more rough. And then just one other thing that I forgot to do, if you'd like to create a blue plastic, let me just show you how to do that. So I'm going to take this color ramp and I'll press Shift D to duplicate it. We're going to drop it right up here, and then again I want to take the pointiness and put that into the factor, and then I can Control Shift and select this color ramp to preview it. So I can now just change these colors to whatever color I want the plastic to be. So in this case, I want to do a blue plastic. So I'm just going to make this a blue color. And the hex value that I'll be using for this plastic is 233 481. And then also this right here, I don't want this to be this peachy color, so I'm going to make this a little bit more blue and a bit darker. And the hex value that I'll be using for this one is 696C7F. So I can now take the color and put that into the base color, just Control Shift and click on that to preview how that's looking. So I do think a blue plastic looks nice. Of course, you could change this to whatever color of plastic that you want. I'm just going to take this color and put it back into the base color because I prefer the red plastic. All right, and there we have it. So there is the finished procedural scratched plastic material. And here is the final render. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the tutorial. And if you'd like to help support me and my YouTube channel, then you can purchase this procedural material on my Gumroad store, and you also get it if you join my Patreon. And you can also check out my Blender procedural material packs if you'd like to purchase more of my procedural materials, and you can also check out my procedural material tutorial playlist on YouTube if you'd like to watch more procedural material tutorials. So I hope this tutorial was helpful, and thank you for watching.